Hello and welcome to the Everyday Adventure Podcast. My name is Nicki Bass and I will be bringing you thoughts, ideas and stories from some incredible guests to hopefully inspire you to live more adventurously in your everyday lives. So this week was supposed to be my half-term break, but what I thought I would do this week is bring you a super surprise bonus episode. And this is a really special episode because it's actually with my very wonderful editor, Fran Turauskis, who some of you I'm sure are very well aware of. She's a very experienced podcaster herself. She's got her own podcast, Ease Your Adventure. And she has recently started a wonderful new project called On the Outside, which aims to bring diverse voices and stories and narratives into what has traditionally been quite a singular focused and singular voiced area. I think what Fran is doing is absolutely wonderful. And she's still relatively early days with the project, but if you've heard any of her episodes, they're just brilliant. And I just thought it was a great opportunity to speak to Fran, bring her back on this side of the mic again, and hear a little bit more about the podcast and what she's trying to do with it, what her motivation was for starting it was. So Fran, it's brilliant to be speaking to you today. I hope you're well.
Yeah, Nicki, thank you so much for that introduction. That was lovely. And I'm very honoured to be your first returning guest as well.
Yay, that too, yes. I should give out like badges or something. I'm sure there's something I can do for people who actually dare to come back on this show again. Yeah. So it's really lovely to have you here, Fran. And I just wondered, I mean, first of all, maybe if you, because I've obviously given a little bit of a rundown, but if you could sort of give a bit of an idea of what On the Outside is, what it's about, what you're trying to do, that'd be amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. So On the Outside is a panel show podcast. So we have 4 of us in total on every episode. There's myself as host and then 3 guests. And what I ask the guests to do is to bring along a news story from the outdoors from the past 2 or 3 weeks before the recording, essentially. So we end up with really diverse stories and we get to talk between ourselves, with the listeners obviously getting to be privy on the conversations. And the panel that I have, I've deliberately picked them from a vast range of sports. So we have swimmers, we have cyclists, we have runners and hikers and all kinds of things. And also from very diverse backgrounds and demographics as well. So we have different races, different religions, different not as many different sexes, actually. It's quite a lot of women on the panel, but we have different abilities, disabled people and that kind of thing as well. So yeah, it's just as diverse as possible. And the reason that I wanted to do the podcast and to do it as a panel show is that we have some great podcasts, including this one, which are really uplifting stories and raising awareness of the people that are out there. But we haven't really got anything either in the podcast world or in general with the outdoors where we're getting people together and talking about things, and not just the problems and not just the individual stories and the individual's journey to where they are now, but talking about the sports that we love and talking about how we can make things better and how everyone sees things from their point of view, essentially. And they've just been really good conversations. The amount of things that have been brought to the table, which I just wouldn't have known about without having this podcast, has been amazing. So I'm learning so much, not just in terms of people's experiences, but the sports as well. And it's just something which has been so fun so far, very time consuming, very difficult. It's a very big undertaking. And even before I started, I knew that, but I still didn't know quite how much it would be. But it's such a good project to be working on. I'm so glad to have everyone involved in it, essentially.
No, it's like you said, I think that aspect of it that is so unique, that it is this sort of this panel discussion, and you're bringing in stories from the outside where you're discussing them. I think, there are a number of podcasts, including this one, which are sort of interviews with individuals. I think bring that in. And I know we've had that conversation about, I know how challenging it is just trying to coordinate with everybody's schedules to get one person or to get two of us into one place at one time. I think ours is a case example. This has probably taken about 3 weeks to get together. And I work with you every week. So knowing how challenging that is, I can only imagine that the work that goes into sort of, bringing that panel together and those conversations. I was wondering if you could give some examples maybe of some of the stories that you've covered, I guess the ones that have really stuck with you particularly, or like you said, that you wouldn't have maybe come across if you hadn't had the podcast or be doing this work.
Yeah, so some of the ones which I just don't have as much experience in. The first episode that we did was quite water-based, and so we had Eden El-Getty, who is a swimmer, and she was talking about water safety and that kind of thing. We were also talking about the big news story which went across lots of national newspapers, which was Southern Water being able to dump all of their waste into the sea and that kind of thing, and how that obviously is affecting swimmers, it's affecting wildlife, and why they were allowed to do these kind of practices. So that was a really nice mix of something that's kind of political, but it's also very much based in outdoors, and Eden gave us some very practical tips about how to be safe around the water as well. So that was lovely. And another one which was just something which really made me stop and think was we had Kirsty Palace talk about the relationship between Afghanistan and the outdoors. And I think that, Nicki, this is something that I got in touch with you with very briefly afterwards, because for me, it was just something that I was completely oblivious to the relationships there between, I'm trying to think of the words. There's obviously a lot of adventurers like yourself that come from the army side of things, so there's the relationship there, but also to find out that there was such a big mountain biking community, such a big climbing community, and that these kind of sports were quite often being used for empowerment, particularly with women, but in general with the community of Afghanistan. So it just opened up that conversation, which I wouldn't have thought to have unless somebody else had brought the story to the table.
No, I mean, that was such a fascinating episode as well, because I just, I think even from someone who's got some experience, some lived experience of being in the country and working there, I think, it's the bits that don't get reported as well. It's this sort of and I think that's something that you're doing with the podcast as a whole, is this, we get snapshots, and particularly in the media tend to focus on particular stories or the things that are either most challenging or difficult, whether it's a geopolitical situation, whether it's, and populations get seen in quite a one-dimensional way. And when we get those snapshots I can't even speak now, those snapshots. And I think there is something, I mean, I know with that piece that you did, it was like, actually there's this whole country, people who are multi-dimensional, multifaceted, and we just don't get to see that. And I think that narrative extends right across all the work that you're doing about how we tend to see people through a single lens. We ascribe them with a single identity. And particularly, I think when it comes to diversity and inclusion, it's, you can be, this is you, this is who you represent, this is what you represent. And actually, I think what's really fascinating about what you're doing is you're bringing people from diverse backgrounds and diverse experiences together, but actually the stories you are discussing are collective. You're bringing your different perspectives towards those, but it creates a much more holistic, I think, view, particularly in the outdoors, which can be seen as, such a single lens story as well. I guess I'm just wondering, I don't mean, I know you're only 5 episodes in. 5 episodes, is it? Yes.
Just recording
I say only.
I mean, one this week. Yeah,
that's a pretty huge undertaking, I can imagine. I mean, I guess, where would you like to see the podcast go? But also, I think, what would you like to see happen in terms of that conversation around inclusion in the outdoors? I know this is something we've spoken about a lot already, but, obviously not necessarily always on the podcast. But yeah, I just wondered sort of your thoughts about, within the podcast itself, and then more widely too.
Yeah, so the podcast is meant to be about starting the conversations. It's absolutely no plan to try and solve everything within the episodes. I like to keep them quite short. They're all about 45 minutes long, so it slips in nicely to people's day. No excuse not to listen to it. And the idea is that it starts the conversation that then listeners can go and take away. So hopefully they can go and have conversations with their own friends and family and that kind of thing, or on their own platforms. But I really love it that we're already starting to get people write in about some of the episodes as well and give their own opinions. And in the 5th episode, I will be sharing some of the listeners' opinions for the first time as well. So that's one of the things that I really want with it, is just to be able to collectively grow, have more people on the panel, have guests on, have guest hosts and that kind of thing. So it's not just me leading the conversation, and just to open it up and really have it as a starting point to take these conversations further. And we'll be returning to things, I'm sure, that we've spoken about. We'll be coming back to them again and again and seeing how far we've got with it. And yeah, hopefully doing that. On something that we've spoken about is the very logistical side of things. It takes a lot of work, this podcast, and I would love to see it funded. It's something which I've been working on really hard to try and get the funding and pin down where that money comes from and how to get it into something like this. And it's still something that I'm working on. If there's anybody out there with any connections or any idea how to find this, please do hit me up. And it would be great to be able to see this have longevity and be an ongoing conversation.
No, definitely. And like you say, it's, the perennial challenge of podcasts in general, I think. If people want to find out more, if they're listening to this and think, actually, I would love to listen, or I'd love to get involved, or I know someone who might be able to help, or actually, I just, this is something that I've not really had much exposure to yet. I mean, where can they go? Where can they find out more?
So the best thing to do is to search on wherever you're listening to this podcast at the moment, and it's just called On the Outside, so nice and simple to find. We are on social media, and it's On the Outside Pod on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, although we don't do very much on Facebook. And we have a website as well, so ontheoutsidepodcast.co.uk. And episodes are going out once a month at the moment, but we also have a newsletter that goes out twice a month. So between the episodes, we get to share some of the stories that we've noticed that we're maybe thinking about putting into the podcast, that catch our eye between episodes.
Brilliant. And yeah, I highly recommend people sign up for your newsletter as well, because it's got some great stories, some wonderful links, and like you said, the stuff that goes on in the background, or the things that you've not necessarily been able to cover, or if people want to dig into deeper, it's really, I mean, there are some emails that come in that I just automatically delete into my inbox, but yours is definitely one I open. So you should feel very privileged, by the way.
Yeah. I do. I know the same thing. Yeah.
No, genuinely, it's a really interesting read, and there are, certainly something that I'm really conscious of, and I definitely don't always get it right, is that because there has been such a, maybe not so much, well, there's been a singular narrative, particularly with regards to the outdoors, but because also in terms of the stories that tend to get covered or that are raised to awareness, and the people you tend to be connected with, sometimes it can be quite challenging to find those other stories that, that opens up your perspective, that brings in a new, view or vision of what's possible, or the challenges that people who, have had to face in terms of getting out there. So I think, that work is really important. And I think it's, it definitely prompts me to to reflect, if nothing else, on the work that I'm doing. And I think, for people listening, hopefully also will sort of, help people to seek out other narratives, other stories, be inspired, and I think that's, so important. Fran, that's been amazing. Thank you so much for joining me today. And I'm so glad we finally managed to find a time in between child sicknesses and breaking bikes and all the rest of the life events that have conspired. And wish you all the very best of it. I really can't wait to see where it goes. I think it's such an exciting project. So thank you so much for sharing it with us.
Thank you so much for letting me share it.
Brilliant. Take care. Bye.
Bye.